Welcome back to Are You Smarter Than a Libertarian, the show where we slice through government nonsense and call it exactly what it is, a bunch of nonsense. I'm Jeff, your host, and today we're diving into the 10th Amendment. It is a short, simple, and if taken seriously, could put a hard limit on how much the federal government can meddle in your life. It says, and I quote, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people." That might sound straightforward, but the fight over what it means has been raging for more than 2 centuries. From the founding fathers' vision of decentralized power to modern Supreme Court battles, this one sentence has been used to defend liberty and ignored to justify government overreach. Today, we'll look at how it came to be, how the courts have treated it, and why libertarians see it as one of the most important lines in the entire Constitution. Now, let's start where it all began. And this is the historical background. This is going to be 2 parts because there's a lot to it here, but it's needed to understand it. When the United States first tried self-government, it was under the Articles of Confederation. That system gave the national government only the powers that were expressly delegated to it. That meant no guessing, no stretching definitions, no creative interpretations. The problem was that this left the national government too weak to handle big issues. Funding the Revolutionary War was a nightmare. Interstate disputes were common. It was a mess, but we have even a bigger mess now. Federalists like Alexander Hamilton and James Madison. Funny thing, Alexander Hamilton wanted to create a national bank when the country was first founded. James Madison and Alexander Hamilton wanted a stronger national government with enumerated powers. They argued that a Bill of Rights was not necessary because the Constitution already limited what the government could do. Madison even said that listing rights might actually be dangerous because it could imply that the federal government had powers beyond those specifically listed, and I can kind of see that. The anti-federalists were not buying it. People like Patrick Henry, give me liberty or give me death, and George Mason feared that vague constitutional language like the necessary and proper clause would be twisted into an excuse for endless expansion of federal authority. They worried the states would lose their independence and that individual freedoms would eventually be sacrificed in the name of national interest, national security, whatever you want to call it. This clash set the stage for what would become the Bill of Rights. The anti-federalists insisted on explicit protections for individual liberties and state sovereignty before they would support ratifying the Constitution. Without their resistance, the 10th Amendment might never have existed. Now we're going to move forward to 1789. James Madison introduced a package of proposed amendments that would become the Bill of Rights. The 10th Amendment was among them, making it clear that powers not granted to the federal government belong to the states or to the people. And that's hugely important. We need to remember that anything not delegated to the federal government belongs to the states and the people. Here's where a subtle but important change happened. In the Articles of Confederation, the rule was that powers had to be expressly delegated to the national government. That word expressly is missing from the 10th Amendment. Some argue it should be included, but Congress rejected it. This allowed for implied federal powers under certain circumstances. And we all know once the government starts taking more and more power, it doesn't give it back. Even with that change, the core idea remained that the Constitution created a federal government of limited powers. Madison reassured Congress that the federal government could not act outside the boundaries set by the Constitution. Justice Joseph Story later called the amendment declaratory, meaning it simply restated the obvious. Now, for libertarians such as myself, this is one of the clear statements that the people are supposed to be in charge. It's also a reminder that the founders did not want power concentrated in a distant capital. They wanted most authority to remain local, where it could be checked and challenged more easily. Now, we can't talk about a constitutional amendment without the Supreme Court. And this is going to be a two-parter as well. The 10th Amendment's journey through the court has been anything but consistent. In 1819, the Supreme Court heard McClellan v. Virginia. This case was about whether Congress could create a national bank. Chief Justice John Marshall said yes, using the necessary and proper clause. Remember that from earlier, and that was how they justified it. He argued the 10th Amendment did not deny the federal government powers that were implied by the Constitution. That decision was a huge boost to federal authority. Just a few years later, in Gibson v. Ogden, 1824, the court broadened the meaning of the Commerce Clause to include navigation. That meant the federal government could regulate more than just trade. Libertarians see these early rulings as the first big crack in the wall that the 10th Amendment was supposed to build around federal power, but we all know the federal government loves to increase its power. Then came the New Deal era in the 20th century under FDR. In United States v. Darby, 1941, the court called the 10th Amendment a truism. In plain English, they said it does not actually restrict federal power. It just restates that power is delegated. And this effectively gutted the amendment. The very next year, in Wickard v. Filburn, 1942, the court upheld federal quotas on wheat production for a farmer who was growing it for his own use. The reasoning was that if he had not grown his own wheat, he might have bought some, and that could affect interstate commerce. That decision basically said that almost anything can be regulated by the federal government if you twist the logic hard enough and you expand it like a pair of fat pants. Now, let's get into the Supreme Court era, part 2. In 1976, the courts handed down National League of Cities versus Usury, ruling that Congress could not apply certain labor laws to state employees because it violated state sovereignty. And that was a win for the 10th Amendment, but not a big one. But less than a decade later, in Garcia v. San Antonio Metropolitan Transit Authority, 1985, the court reversed itself. They said it was too difficult to define traditional state functions and that the protection of state sovereignty should be handled through the political process, not the courts. Libertarians, such as myself, saw that as the judiciary walking away from its duty to enforce limits on federal power, but the courts never enforced limits on federal power till recently. And the 1990s brought a revival of the 10th Amendment in what became known as New Federalism era. In New York v. United States, the court created the anti-commandeering doctrine. That meant the federal government could not force state governments to enforce federal law. The same principle was applied in Prince v. United States 1997, which struck down a federal requirement for local law enforcement to conduct background checks on gun buyers. Okay, that's a win. I will take that. In the United States v. Lopez, 1995, the court struck down a federal gun-free school zone law because it had nothing to do with interstate commerce. This was the first time in decades the court had limited the Commerce Clause. They'd been expanding it faster than a fat person eating at a buffet. In United States v. Morrison in 2000, they used the same reasoning to throw out part of the Violence Against Women Act. Now, for libertarians, these cases were proof that the 10th Amendment could still be used to keep the federal government in check. However, we all know the federal government loves to increase its power. Now, modern cases and a libertarian takeaway. In Bond v. United States 2011, the court ruled that individuals, not just states, can challenge federal laws under the 10th Amendment. That case involved a chemical weapons law being applied in a domestic dispute, and it reaffirmed that federalism protects personal liberty. In NFIB v. Sebelius in 2012, the court upheld the Affordable Care Act's individual mandate as a tax, but struck down the Medicaid expansion requirements for states, calling it unconstitutionally coercive. In Murphy v. NCAA in 2018, the court applied the anti-commandeering doctrine to strike down a federal law that prevented states from legalizing sports betting. That was another win for state autonomy. But here's the thing, as we know throughout the entire amendment process of the first 10, not all cases have favored decentralization. In Gonzalez v. Reich, the court ruled that the federal government could override state laws allowing medical marijuana using everyone's favorite clause, the Commerce Clause. For libertarians and anyone who loves freedom and liberty, the lesson is clear. When the 10th Amendment is taken seriously, it prevents the federal government from becoming an all-powerful central authority. When it's ignored, everything becomes a matter for Washington to decide, and individual choice gets crushed in the process. Now, looking forward, because we can't look back, we can only learn from the past, but we can shape the future. Looking forward, the amendment will be central in debates over healthcare mandates, which shouldn't exist, environmental rules, abortion, immigration, and even AI regulation. Reserved to the people means exactly that. It is not just about states. It is about you. Now, let's wrap this up as we've gone kind of long. The 10th Amendment is proof that the founders understood something we keep forgetting, and that's how it always is. The farther power is from the people, the less accountable it becomes. When the 10th is respected, states can experiment, compete, and protect their citizens' unique values. When it is ignored, everything gets decided by the same crowd that can't even balance a budget and runs a $2 trillion deficit every year. It is not just a line on an old document. It is a principle that keeps power where it belongs, in the hands of the people. If we don't defend it, we will lose it. And once it is gone, so is the ability to live under rules that reflect our own choices. I'm Jeff, and this has been Are You Smarter Than a Libertarian? Subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeart Radio, Rumble. Thank you for watching. And as always, stay free, stay informed, and stay accountable.